When we arrived at my mother-in-law's house, she was in the yard. Unable to contain his excitement, my son Joshua ran straight to his grandma, Kathy, shouting loudly.
Grandma.
Joshua had finally achieved his long-awaited dream.
Oh, Joshua! You made it! Welcome, both of you!
Kathy removed her dirt-stained gardening gloves and hugged Joshua tightly. Her expression was softer and warmer than any I had ever seen.
It's been a while.
It's been a long time, Kathy, I added. It had been 7 years since we last saw each other, and I felt a little happy to be here. Although there wasn't anything in particular I wanted to talk about, conversations naturally began to flow.
Grandma, what were you doing?
I was cleaning up the garden. I wanted to make it look nice before you all arrived.
Whether it was because of that effort or her regular maintenance, the garden was beautifully kept, with a serene atmosphere that seemed to reflect Kathy's personality. A few flowers were also planted in a small flower bed.
Now that Joshua is here, let's get some tea ready. Come on, let's go inside with Grandma.
With that, she took Joshua's hand. It was truly a heartwarming moment.
Mom, about that thing we discussed.
At this point, my husband Henry brought up something in a rather ominous tone.
I understand.
I was wondering what they were talking about when I noticed that something was wrong with Joshua. The huge smile he had just moments ago had disappeared, and his face had turned pale. What's wrong? Then Joshua said something completely unexpected.
We need to call the police. Grandma.
Hello, Martha?
It was a phone call from my mother-in-law, Kathy, who lives far away. My relationship with Kathy is very good, so I'm always happy to chat with her, no matter the topic. Hello, Kathy. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How is everyone doing?
By everyone, she meant me, my husband Henry, and our son Joshua. Joshua is currently in 1st grade. Since he's at school, I couldn't put him on the phone, but he's growing up healthy and strong. As for Henry and me, there's not much to report these days. In the past, I struggled a lot because Henry often attracted strange types, so-called stalkers, but we've overcome that obstacle and are now living peacefully. Yes, we're doing well, thank you.
That's good to hear. By the way, is Joshua there?
Unfortunately, he's at school.
Of course, it's the middle of a weekday.
The last time Kathy and Joshua saw each other was 7 years ago. In other words, they haven't faced each other since Joshua was born. Kathy last saw him as a newborn, and Joshua doesn't even have a memory of meeting her. There are several reasons for this, but the main one is the physical distance between us. From our home to Kathy's house, we have to take a flight. Right after Joshua was born, Henry's job was incredibly busy every year, so we couldn't go back even for summer vacations or Christmas. To make matters worse, the pandemic that has been raging these past few years made it difficult to travel, so we completely missed the timing. However, now that things are beginning to settle down, Henry and I had been talking about visiting this summer. Speaking of which, about this summer vacation.
Will you be able to come?
Yes, that's our plan.
I finally get to see Joshua. I'm really looking forward to it.
I got a call from your mother today. I shared with Henry and our son that evening, including the news about our upcoming visit.
It's already been 7 years. Time flies.
I get to meet Grandma?
Joshua was a grandma's boy. It's strange considering they hadn't even met properly, but Joshua was very attached to Kathy. Kathy was gentle and kind, something that came through clearly even over the phone or video calls. Sadly, Joshua's grandfather, Kathy's husband, passed away before Joshua was born, so he never got to see his grandson. At the time, we had suggested that Kathy move in with us, but she politely declined, saying she preferred being on her own and didn't want to intrude on our time as a couple. This continued even after Joshua was born. Knowing he would finally get to meet his grandmother, Joshua was overjoyed.
Then I'll make sure to request my time off in advance this year.
Yes, please. At that moment, I noticed something. Joshua was staring intently at nothing in particular. He's doing it again. For some reason, Joshua seems to be able to see things that shouldn't be visible, what you might call a sixth sense or psychic ability. At first, neither Henry nor I took it seriously. We thought it was just the kind of story a child of his age would make up. But as time went on, it became clear he wasn't lying, and we eventually accepted it. Joshua's reactions vary depending on what he sees. He's quiet this time, but when he sees something frightening, he sometimes bursts into tears or becomes too scared to move. Whatever Joshua was seeing now didn't seem to be terrifying. He just stared into the void, as if listening to something. Joshua? When I called out to him, Joshua turned to me as if nothing had happened.
It's okay.
Henry and I weren't sure how to respond to that. Since then, Joshua frequently started staring at the same spot in the house without saying anything and then quietly walking away. I found it unsettling and decided to discuss it with Henry.
But he hasn't been crying or anything like he usually does, right?
That's true, but when he stands in the same spot for days on end, it makes you wonder.
Yeah, but what can we do about it? Do you think anything would change if we talked to him?
It's better than doing nothing. He might be going through something difficult.
You're right. I'll talk to him before we go back to Mom's.
Thank you. Henry did talk to Joshua, but all Joshua would say was, "I'm okay." We didn't know what he meant by that, and time just kept passing by without any answers. Then, summer vacation arrived. For Joshua, everything, from flying on a plane to meeting his grandmother, was a first-time experience. As soon as he sat in his airplane seat, his eyes sparkled with excitement, and he eagerly waited for the moment of takeoff. Soon, the captain made an announcement, and the moment finally arrived. Joshua could feel the weight of his body increasing as the plane slowly lifted off the ground, and he was absolutely thrilled.
Are we flying?
He asked me with quiet excitement, and I found his expression utterly adorable. Yes. Look out the window. As the plane gradually separated from the runway, Joshua's excitement grew even more, and he let out joyful exclamations. After about an hour and a half, we safely arrived at our destination airport. Then, after another 30 minutes of driving, we finally reached Kathy's house. Joshua's excitement didn't wane even during the car ride, and I was a bit worried he might exhaust himself before we arrived, but those concerns turned out to be unfounded. When we arrived at Kathy's house, she was in the yard pulling weeds. Unable to contain his excitement, Joshua jumped out of the car and ran straight to Kathy, shouting loudly.
Grandma.
Whether it was a heartwarming reunion or their first meeting, Joshua had finally achieved his long-awaited dream.
Oh, Joshua! You made it! Welcome, both of you. That was a long trip, wasn't it?
Kathy removed her dirt-stained gardening gloves and hugged Joshua tightly. Her expression was softer and warmer than any I had ever seen.
It's been a while.
It's been a long time, Kathy, I added. It had been 7 years since we last saw each other, and I felt a little happy to be here. Although there wasn't anything in particular I wanted to talk about, conversations naturally began to flow.
Grandma, what were you doing?
I was cleaning up the garden. I wanted to make it look nice before you all arrived.
Whether it was because of that effort or her regular maintenance, the garden was beautifully kept, with a serene atmosphere that seemed to reflect Kathy's personality. A few flowers were also planted in a small flower bed.
Now that Joshua is here, let's get some tea ready. Come on, let's go inside with Grandma.
With that, she took Joshua's hand. It was truly a heartwarming moment.
Mom, about that thing we discussed.
At this point, Henry brought up something in a rather ominous tone.
Let's talk about it later. You've just arrived.
Sensing the seriousness of the topic, Kathy firmly cut off the conversation. But I had no idea what they were talking about. What is it? What's this thing you're talking about?
She just said to wait. I'll tell you, but let's hold off for now.
All right. Though I felt a slight sense of exclusion, I agreed that if it was something unpleasant, now wasn't the time to bring it up, so I swallowed my words and let it go. The inside of the house hadn't changed at all in the past 7 years. From the arrangement of the furniture to the overall atmosphere, everything was just as it was, giving me the illusion that I had returned to my own childhood home.
Come on, have a seat wherever you like. I'll make some tea.
I'll help you.
Oh, really? That would be lovely. Thank you.
Even the kitchen cupboards were exactly as I remembered. I took out the instant coffee and tea bags, just as before. Henry prefers coffee, Kathy loves tea, and Joshua likes milk tea, so I prepared each in their respective cups.
You remembered.
Of course. After some time had passed, Henry brought up that matter again.
I think it's about time.
All right.
This time, Kathy gave in, and the two of them left the room together and went upstairs. What could they be talking about? I wondered as I sipped my tea. Then, I noticed that something was wrong with Joshua, who was sitting next to me. The bright smile he had just a few minutes ago had vanished, and his face had turned pale. What's wrong? Joshua then said something completely unexpected.
We need to call the police. Grandma is.
Call the police? What is Joshua talking about? We had been having a normal conversation just a moment ago, so why would he suddenly mention the police? Unable to leave my questions unanswered, I asked Joshua for clarification. What do you mean by call the police?
Grandma. She's in danger.
But he wouldn't say anything more. He wouldn't answer. I had a feeling I'd experienced something like this before. As I strained my increasingly sluggish brain, I finally remembered. Joshua tends not to give detailed answers when he has seen something. If that's the case, then he might have seen something terrifying. As I pondered this, Joshua's condition worsened, and he began trembling uncontrollably in fear. His intense shivering started to make me anxious as well. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. I hesitated, unsure if I should answer it, but eventually decided to go. I didn't want to make a delivery person or someone from the neighborhood come back again, and, more than anything, I couldn't bear to stay in this tense situation. But when I opened the door, it wasn't a delivery person or someone from the neighborhood standing there. It was a woman with a murderous aura, looking like a ghost. She was holding a knife in her right hand. Fear gripped my heart so tightly that I couldn't even manage a raspy cry. Who was she? Why had she come here? What was her purpose? There must have been answers to all these questions, but my mind couldn't process them. Yet, before I completely panicked, one thought flashed in my mind. I have to protect my son. It was at that moment that a large shadow passed in front of the entrance and body slammed the woman. Instinctively, I knew that I had to move now. I turned around to rush to Joshua, only to see Kathy holding him tightly, his face pale with fear. A brief wave of relief washed over me as I turned my attention back to the entrance. There, I saw Henry struggling with the woman. What is going on?
I'm sorry, Martha! I'll explain later. Mom, take Joshua somewhere safe.
Without a word, Kathy swiftly left through the back door with Joshua in tow.
Let go of me! Henry!
My mind refused to comprehend the chaos unfolding before me, leaving me unable to make sense of what was happening. Who is she? As I voiced the question, a bad feeling crept over me. It wasn't just a feeling, but more of a realization, one that I knew couldn't be good. This woman was likely one of the many stalkers who had fixated on Henry. We had enjoyed a few years of peace, but it seems that things had been quietly escalating beneath the surface. The woman Henry had pinned down was apparently named Carol, a younger childhood friend who had harbored feelings for him since they were kids. Now, she sat quietly in a chair, her hands bound after Henry had taken the knife away from her.
But unfortunately, I always saw her as like a sister. I've told her that many times.
So why did she come barging in with a knife today? I directed the question at Henry, but it was Carol who answered.
I knew Henry had a wife and child. They were in the way. If they were gone, Henry would come back to me. Isn't that right?
As you can see, she's not thinking rationally. As for the timing, Mom mentioned that she had been practically living here, so she probably figured it out.
What do you mean? Living here?
Exactly what it sounds like. She would come here almost every day, taking care of Mom's needs without asking, trying to play the role of Henry's wife.
I've never heard anything about this before.
Well, she didn't want to worry you. That's what I wanted to discuss with Mom. Ideally, I wanted to deal with this before it could harm you or Joshua, but she made the first move.
What a nightmare. Over the years, Henry had dealt with numerous stalkers and stalker-like individuals, but this was the first time things had escalated to such a direct and dangerous level. I hadn't told her yet, but I had already called the police, which provided some small measure of comfort. As we talked, Carol muttered to herself in a low voice, almost like a chant.
What will happen to mother-in-law without me? How much have I done for Henry? How much have I done for Kathy? She can't do anything without me. Henry and this house need me.
She didn't seem sane at all. The thought that she might try something even more dangerous filled me with dread. The only slight comfort in this terrifying situation was that she no longer had a weapon and, most importantly, that Joshua was no longer in the room. I couldn't thank Kathy enough for her quick thinking. After a while, Carol began to calm down a bit, and she was able to engage in normal conversation. Though she was still repeatedly apologizing, It was a noticeable improvement from the earlier madness.
Why did you try to do something like this? It's a crime, you know.
I'm sorry. But I wanted you to understand how much I need you.
I've told you many times. Every time I turn you down, it hurts me too.
I couldn't bring myself to intervene in their conversation. To be precise, I didn't want to intervene. Given the lingering fear I still felt, I didn't want to get involved. At that moment, all I could do was wait for the police to arrive. As the tension began to ease, Carol suddenly said,
I'm thirsty.
Henry and I exchanged glances, engaging in a silent conversation. Should we give her something to drink? Should we untie her? Was this request genuine? After silently debating these questions, Henry reluctantly placed a glass of water in front of Carol. He even untied her hands so she could drink properly. That decision turned out to be a mistake.
Don't move!
She grabbed my arm and pulled me toward her with a strength that didn't seem possible for a woman. In her hand was another blade. Carol had apparently hidden a box cutter in one of her pockets.
Carol, stop this! This isn't a joke!
I'm not joking. I'm completely serious. Everything will be fine as long as she's out of the way.
I was taken hostage in a scenario straight out of a crime drama. The trembling blade was pressed against my neck. Strangely, though, I felt oddly calm. Thoughts raced through my mind, like so her thirst was just a ruse, and how can I get out of this situation? My thoughts were eerily clear, even though I didn't fully understand why.
Think this through. Carol! Calm down!
I told you, I am calm.
She wasn't listening to Henry at all. I couldn't see her face, but I could tell from her tone that she was probably wearing a cold, detached expression. Despite the danger, I remained calm. The reason for that would soon become clear. The sound of pounding on the front door echoed through the living room.
Excuse me, Miss Smith. This is the police. Is everything all right?
Somewhere in the back of my mind, I must have already anticipated this outcome. After all, it was I who had called the police. Carol, no longer able to remain calm, dropped the box cutter she was holding and tried to flee. But Henry didn't miss the opportunity. He quickly grabbed her, holding her in a tight grip, and she was once again restrained. After Carol was taken away by the police, Joshua and Kathy returned a little later. Joshua, are you okay?
Yeah. Grandma took me to a friend's house, so I was fine.
Thank goodness. Thank you, Kathy.
It's nothing. Are you all right?
A lot happened, but we're safe now.
I was worried.
Looking at Joshua, I remembered how he had started trembling and saying we needed to call the police right after we arrived at Kathy's house. Could it be that Joshua had somehow foreseen this incident? By the way, Joshua, when we first got here, you said we needed to call the police. What did you mean by that? Joshua looked a bit confused, but then slowly began to explain.
I saw something bad. Something dark and scary. I thought Grandma's house was in danger, so I said we should call the police.
So, it was just as I suspected. Then he said something that made my ears ring in disbelief.
Grandpa told me, too.
Grandpa. Of course, Joshua knew about his grandfather, but he had never met him. So what did he mean by he told me? Both Henry and I couldn't hide our confusion, But Kathy, who seemed to have understood something, nodded knowingly.
Joshua, can you see things too?
Yeah. Can't everyone else see them?
No, Grandma, Dad, and Mom can't see them. Joshua, you're special.
What do you mean by that?
My husband could see things too. You know, spirits. He used to talk about it all the time.
It seems that Joshua's grandfather had a sixth sense, and it was passed down to Joshua through what appears to be a form of genetic inheritance.
There are different kinds of psychic abilities, but my husband often talked about the future. Things that were going to happen. The thing that surprised me the most was when he talked about Joshua.
She paused before continuing. Kathy.
He talked about Joshua, who wasn't even conceived yet, almost like a prophecy. For example, he knew our grandchild would be a boy before he was born. At the time, I had no way to confirm it, but now I realize that everything he said was true.
I see. I had heard stories about my father-in-law, but this was the first time I'd heard this. Kathy said it was because no one would have believed it if I had talked about it. And she was probably right. I'm not sure I would have believed it back then. But now, things were different. I was convinced that Joshua had indeed inherited his grandfather's abilities.
Now that I think about it, Carol only started coming around after he passed away. She must have known she couldn't come near us while he was alive because he would have seen right through her.
That makes sense. She must have been afraid that her actions would be exposed. Although it's just speculation, it seems to fit the situation perfectly.
Grandpa was here at home. He kept saying, "Be careful."
I see. So that's why Joshua was staring off into space at our house. That's why he kept saying, "I'm okay." I was deeply impressed by the unique abilities of my son and father-in-law. But more than anything, I was incredibly relieved that we had come through this ordeal unscathed.
All right, let's sit down and have that tea again. Joshua, would you like to help this time?
Yeah, sure.
Just a short while ago, there had been a terrible confrontation in the living room. But now, a peaceful atmosphere had returned. I wasn't quite ready to fully adjust to the change, but I did feel safe. The tea probably helped with that.
Mom, I've been thinking.
What is it?
Henry brought up something suddenly. I felt a sense of déjà vu and unconsciously braced myself.
Would you reconsider and come live with us?
My wariness turned out to be unnecessary. There was no need to be on guard with this topic. Given what had just happened, I understood Henry's concern, and I was actually in favor of the idea myself. So, I decided to offer a little support. It would give us all peace of mind. For you and for us, Kathy. There was always the possibility that Carol could fall back into madness and attack again. We didn't know how long the law would keep her restrained, but having Kathy live with us would be a sure way to keep her safe. I was speaking for myself, but I also knew that Joshua would be thrilled to live with his beloved grandmother. Joshua would be really happy too. In a way, that was the final nudge.
Well, I don't want to cause any more worry, so if everyone is okay with it, I'll accept your offer.
It looks like Carol's case is going to be handled as a criminal matter.
Really? He told me that as soon as he came home. I wasn't indifferent, but I didn't have much more to say about it. As long as we never had to face her again, that was enough for me. Some time had passed since that incident.
Dad, welcome home.
Welcome back.
I'm home.
We're living a very peaceful and happy life now. My relationship with my mother-in-law, Kathy, which was already good, has become even stronger, and now we've found shared hobbies that we enjoy doing together. However, I can't compete with my son. Whenever Joshua is home, Kathy is completely devoted to him, always taking care of him. At first, I worried about whether we were imposing on her, but after seeing how the two of them interact, that worry faded away. Joshua is always smiling when he's with Kathy, and just watching them together brings a smile to my face as well. Seeing the bond between grandmother and grandson, Henry and I felt deep relief, knowing that our decision was the right one. It was a wonderful choice that brought happiness to all four of us. I'm confident that our family will continue to live happily, supporting each other along the way. How did you like this story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.